Vanity and pride. It is said in the work that two giants called pride and vanity walk before us all, arranging everything beforehand. The question is then, are we able to draw any distinction between them? Based upon personal observation or the observation of others? Are these two the only giants that walk in front of us arranging our affairs? The most important thing about vanity and pride is that they must be studied in oneself through personal observation. We may know theoretically about them without having the slightest idea how they manifest in us. Everyone has their own forms of vanity and pride which vary in different cases, and we must remember that they seem quite reasonable, quite natural, and so go unnoticed in us. Both pride and vanity are connected with self-love, but although they have this affinity, their manifestations can be quite different, so that one opposes the other. For example, we are paid a compliment and our vanity is delighted, but pride makes us feel awkward about it. On the whole, people are agreed that vanity is based upon the unreal part of us, and that pride is connected with something real. From personal observation, we can say that vanity appears to come from false personality, and pride can belong to the good eyes of personality, perhaps even essence, in which case it is with the right neutralizing force. Eyes that are now proud might become part of self-will. We are always acting and reacting from vanity, but pride can be passive, or a kind of restraining force. It is true to say that pride can become part of our will, however vanity cannot. We can see in a sense that the density of pride is greater than the density of vanity, and so more can be done, more can be endured from pride, and in this way it resembles our will. Reflect here upon the tale that Lucifer fell from heaven, owing to vanity or pride. These two giants that walk in front of us, deciding everything beforehand, may sometimes cooperate and sometimes be antagonistic. This is why it is difficult to define any particular action as being due exclusively to either one or the other. Vanity, however, has a different internal taste from pride. We may be proud of some new purchase and yet vain when using it, which is quite true, and the feelings do taste differently. One could be proud of some old treasure yet certainly not vain when admiring it. Everyone has a different value system and so associates different feelings with things. Vanity too is usually connected with making an impression on others, which is also true, as vanity always needs an audience. Even when we are cosseting ourselves alone in a dressing room and taking selfies, we imagine the effect on people looking at us. People would not think of making up or spending time on their appearance if they were the only inhabitant of some deserted island. However, if they were one of two, then they probably would, particularly if they were one of three inhabitants. Vanity is not concerned simply with outward appearance. The ugly hunchback pope was notorious for his vanity. He had no illusions about his looks, but was vain of his wit and position in the literary world. A distinction made between pride and vanity is that vanity may want you to show off, or be important, and then it may happen that pride would prevent this from occurring. Another distinction worth noting is that pride can make us ashamed of not knowing something, whereas vanity can make us pretend to know it. I do not agree, however, with the assumption that pride self-justifies a great deal. It is usually vanity that causes self-justifying. The latter is an expression of false personality defending itself. Pride, on the other hand, can make us ashamed of self-justifying. We can attempt to distinguish between pride and vanity through facial expression. By the way in which these two emotions are represented in our moving center, through expression and posture. A proud look is quite different from a vain look. This is useful to reflect upon, and which causes us to blush the most. Pride may appear to reside more in our intellectual center, however the center of gravity for pride lies not in the intellectual center. It's an emotion arising from self-love which can manifest itself in any of the emotional parts of centers, including the emotional part of the intellectual center. When pride is turned outward, it can be an accomplice to vanity. If turned inward, it can be of use in helping us to make effort in remembering our aim in this work. When one's pride is directed inward toward themselves, it can, for instance, make us ashamed of not keeping our aim. Although in many ways alike, pride and vanity can also be so different in quality as to be two entirely different things, as different in intensity as, say, jealousy is different from envy. Vanity seems to be connected more with the ephemeral things in life, the more external accessories. Whereas pride seems to belong to a much more permanent and inner part of ourselves. One may be vain of what they do, but seem to be proud of what they are, or imagines that they are anyway. Assaults on one's vanity make us angry, even offended more than hurt. A hard blow at one's pride hurts deeply and makes us feel murderous, as if it arouses an instinct, one of psychological self-preservation. False personality is kept going through vanity and pride, but more so through vanity. One can take pride, say in your work, be proud of it, or we can also be vain of it. In the former case, although one does not like criticism, one accepts it for the sake of the work, whereas if one is simply vain then they resent and reject criticism. It is vanity which blows its own trumpet, whereas pride is silent. Pride seems to go deeper than false personality or personality. Sometimes it seems to be even connected with essence, it seems such an integral part of who we are. It is hard to see how vanity could ever be directed at anything other than subjective things, our achievements for example. Whereas pride can be redirected if we are able to observe it and its roots deeply enough. It may be capable of directing force internally instead of externally, though it may not yet be clear how this happens. It could become shame. It may even lead to a sense of our own nothingness, not just through a swing of the pendulum. Pride does not seem to be subject to the same swings of the pendulum that vanities experience, if it could really be seen and directed. Vanity must eventually disappear, however pride can be useful if it is not one's master. This may however be only because it is so close that we do not see it for what it really is. Reflective experience or observation of self is associated with differences in the brain's default mode network and connectivity. For example, when people become pensive or reflect upon matters, the default mode network grows quieter and less active. Default mode network is basically busy noise, our mind wandering, not thinking about present, but usually past events or future hopes, more so the future than the past. It takes our mind away from its immediate environment, in a temporal sense. To look at something mindfully is therefore to look at it objectively, which influences our positive or negative affective reactions. The things that occupy our awareness tend to occupy our conscious mind in a positive or a negative way. Our brain then encodes these things by assigning a positive or a negative feeling to them. The idea of mindfulness is thus to take an objective attitude, a detached attitude to the things that our brain is paying attention to. When we strip perception of affective reaction, it becomes detached and objective, mindful. Viewing the world mindfully is to change our relationship to feelings, mostly feelings of anxiety and feelings of rage, which are pride and vanity. These thoughts can have either a feeling tone or hedonic tone, then there are pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. George Romans therefore asks, what is the evolutionary function of feelings? Pleasure and pain must have been evolved as the subjective accompaniment of processes which are respectively beneficial or injurious to an organism, and so evolved for the purpose, or to the end that the organism should seek the one and shun the other. The worm in us, our one-dimensional thinking, feelings of approach and avoidance, are motivating behavior. After reflecting on feelings mindfully, they no longer have the impact on our emotions that was evident previously. Feelings could be regarded as being about judgments, then about behavior in response to those judgments. Feelings can therefore be regarded as encoding for judgments. Are feelings then accurate judgments regarding things in our environment, considering they evolved in primitive man who resided in a hunter-gatherer environment? Mindful reflection can be regarded as wisdom, or regarding feelings with discernment. Here we can see a connection at a sub-level between reflection and groups of eyes, which applies particularly to mindfulness or being mindful of oneself. It implies looking at things in a new way, more objectivity, with less attachment, and then carrying that objective view with us into daily life. Viewing our feelings with less attachment, so they get less traction and draw less power from us, pulling us off course in a particular, usually negative direction. There are always feelings associated with groups of eyes. And if we were able to pay close enough attention during periods of self-study, then we would notice how different groups of eyes or different centers of gravity compete for our attention, using feelings. It is the feeling that attracts or draws our focus, shining the light of awareness on those groups of eyes. The natural way to get rid of a negative feeling, for example, is to come up with a solution to the problem. Feelings are the things that give groups of eyes power over us, dominating our consciousness. Mindfulness is then a way of determining which groups do and don't get to be in control. By being mindful of what triggers the groups, We can determine which groups get our attention and which do not. Mindfulness gives at least some control over our feelings, as we decide which feelings change our perceptions, i.e., fear can make us perceive threats where they do not in fact exist. When we're being mindful, we're influencing whether an entire frame of mind sets in, which influences subsequent thoughts and perceptions. These groups of eyes can influence thoughts and perceptions in a really subtle way, and for very long periods of time. Hatred is a good example of this, as hatred is a feeling that defines enemies. Modern behavioral science has discovered that when our friends do something good, we attribute this to their inner essence, because we believe that they are good people and therefore have positive feelings for them. When one of our friends, however, does something bad, we attribute this to some external factor, some circumstance, or other outside of them, even beyond their control. We think about our own behavior in a similar manner. By contrast, when we think about our enemies and they do something bad, we attribute that to their essential nature. However, when they do something good, we believe this due to some external or environmental factor, and feel it had nothing to do with them, perhaps being merely coincidental. Presumably this anomaly exists in our mind to encourage us to talk about or socialize enemies, sharing intelligence in strategic terms, because talking about them in unflattering terms undermines their stature. We actually believe that our enemies are people who do bad things by nature. When a nation is deciding to go to war, it matters what the people think and how the leader of the other side is framed. Once you've framed the leader as an enemy, it is very hard for that country to come out of it. For you or for the ensuing generation to change their mind. This enemy frame can be sustained with subtler themes of antipathy too, which is the business of propaganda. Mindfulness and a mindful attitude can be beneficial and counteract this. The case for viewing mindfulness in this context, as an observing view of the mind being governed by competing groups of eyes, demonstrates how our attitude can be influenced through mindfulness. This can influence our frame of mind in a very subtle way as our feelings influence our frame of mind. Unless one is being very mindful about what is going on, an attitude can hold us hostage. It's important to note too, there is no part of our mind that can be considered as ourselves. There is no central group of eyes that we have to own or to be, they are trying to become the self for a while, and could thus be defined as sub-selves or groups of eyes, as groups of interests. We can think of pride and vanity then from the side of what is useful and what is useless in connection with work. Pride can turn into shame, and genuine pride can turn into real shame or humility in the presence of what is higher. An individual without proper shame and so without proper pride is not really suitable for this work because there is no depth in them. However, vanity is always wrong, except as it were in very small doses. Personality has scarcely any right to exist. When we ascribe some success to ourselves, it goes to strengthen false personality and so increase vanity in us. One is allowed to ascribe a little to oneself for a short time, however the trouble is we like to talk about our successes or about what we did and what we said, even if we are silent, we still think about it. Another great giant is laziness, and these three giants, pride, vanity, and laziness are constantly striving for possession of us. Slothfulness prearranges our actions mechanically to avoid exertion almost as much as vanity or pride. Fortunately, this giant is apt to walk in an opposite direction to the other giants, and our days become a battle between them. Pride often refuses to let one give in to laziness, where vanity will arrange something that will suit them both. There is another giant, fear. We could even say that pride, vanity, fear and laziness control us mostly. Buffers, most importantly, are not to be confused with giants. Buffers are blinkers that prevent us from seeing contradictions. It is our vanity that creates them. Buffers are not giants. Nor again is false personality. It's what it is made of and is founded upon, i.e. vanity and imagination. We could even say that imagination is used by the giants and would be understanding things deeply if we said this, remembering perhaps the story of the magician's sheep, and the wizard who made them imagine they were lions or tigers. We all know how closely vanity and imagination are connected, and how closely fear and imagination are connected, speaking here of emotional fear, not fear arising from instinctive center. Negative emotions, particularly self-pity, are also giants. There are some interesting giants in literature, such as for example one described in the early part of Peer Gynt, a 5-act play in verse by the Norwegian dramatist Henrik Ibsen. Then there is the giant of despair. Gurdjieff taught that the fundamental cause of almost all misunderstanding arising in the inner world of man, and in the common life of people, is chiefly due to a psychic factor formed in our being at an early age, due in the large part to wrong education, the stimulation of which gives rise in us to impulses of vanity. The happiness and self-conscious states, that is, self-remembering, which should exist in any real sense of being, depend in most cases exclusively on the absence in us of feelings of vanity. Gurdjieff made it his own aim in working with students to hit mercilessly at every manifestation of this factor which hinders all development, preventing any genuine and real relation to one's inner life, the harmonious adjustment of which can lead to all true states of happiness. The point being here that we must study pride and vanity in ourselves and all their different gradations. Do you know your own forms of vanity and how much they occupy you? Do you know where your pride lies? Where do you feel that you love yourself, that you admire yourself? Where do you most feel that you are utterly different from other people? Where are you most conceited? What do you boast about? What are you silent about? Vanity is frequently very talkative, whereas pride is silent. Which is the deeper wound? Wounded vanity or wounded pride? What is it that you cannot forgive? You know that if you cannot forgive it is because of some form of self-love which, ideally speaking, has to be ground out of you.